The Association of American Medical Colleges is pleased to welcome you to this webinar, Preparing for the MCAT Exam, a conversation with a medical student. My name is Jennifer, and it's my pleasure to facilitate. We are recording, and we will make the archive available afterwards, and we will email you once we do post that. We did mute all participant audio. If you need help, please send us a message. The presentation will include time for Q&A. You may submit a question at any time by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's now my pleasure to welcome Javarro Russell, Senior Director, Admissions Testing Service. Javarro.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We are so happy to have you here with us today. Today, we're going to have the pleasure of talking with a student who has found her way to work out the MCAT, the way in which allowed her to be successful. So today we're going to try to find insights from her journey that will allow you all to do well also. So let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm Javarro Russell, again, the Senior Director for Admissions Testing Services, and that means that we control the MCAT exam, and that includes research and development, as well as business operations that go along with your registration and receiving your score report, but also the test prep that we provide you all. So at this time, let me bring in Jenny. Hey, Jenny, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. We're so happy to have you here with us today. Let's talk a little bit about where you're coming from and how you sort of arrived at where you are in medical school. But let me first give a little bit of background on you. So Jenny is a second-year MD PhD student at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School and Princeton University. So Jenny, tell us a little bit about your journey into medical school, how you got interested in medicine and how you began the process of preparing for medical school.
So I got into medicine sort of through a way of being inspired by my mom, who was a home health worker, and she would work with patients that are either geriatric and needing care at elderly homes or on hospice and needing care. And since she and my father had immigrated from Nigeria into the States, so she couldn't just go straight into medical school since it's very difficult for immigrants to do that here in the States. So I got to spend a lot of time with her, seeing how she interacted with her clients and her patients. And then as I was growing up and then being sick myself, being in the system, it was nice to be sort of to see this dynamic change between how nervous my parents would be whenever they brought me to the visit and how calm and transfixed and everything that they would be at the end of the visit. And that was really beautiful to me. So I sort of jumped on ship of wanting to be a doctor. And when I got to college, I had met an MD PhD student at Albert Einstein who came to speak at my university. And he had just blown me away with about how all the different things that I could do as an MD PhD student. And that really got me interested in wanting to sort of do both, because at that time I was sort of split brain between loving medicine and loving science. So that's how I sort of got into it.
Well, that's fantastic. That is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing a little bit about that. But we want to get into what all of the audience here on this webinar really wants to know is how you began preparing yourself for the MCAT exam. We often receive questions on how to get started and issues around sort of resource overload. Can you talk to us about how you got started in your preparation?
My first steps in getting ready for the MCAT were really getting acquainted with what the terminology was and figuring out the cost of the exam and stuff like that. And once I figured out those logistics, it was a bunch of resource overload, because I would see on Reddit or student doctor forums online and some parts through the like pre-med community in college as well that would talk about different resources that they like either praised or hated, from Kaplan review books to like the Princeton review books, exam crackers and whatnot. And I spent a lot of time and money like trying to find out different things that would work for me, and not really trying to figure out like what was going to be the best for me, but really what was like the best that other people had said. So that was more to my detriment than anything, because that like spent a lot more of my time than I would have liked on that whole first stage of like MCAT studying.
Yeah, it feels like it is a confusing time, and you're just trying to just adjust to understanding what your needs are and trying to be a bit more efficient in your studying, because of course you have to manage your time pretty wisely, I imagine, in order to do this really well.
Yeah.
So I know that it's important for you to figure out where you are before you sort of jump in and start practicing. Can you tell us a little bit about how you began assessing your baseline?
So with a friend that I had like ended up becoming like looking for accountability partners in the study process, and me and Sarah are great friends now. We ended up like taking a day out of our Saturdays to like go to Starbucks and sit down and just take a full length practice exam to be like our diagnostics, because we both had not taken an MCAT at that MCAT practice exam at that point. And I used that to sort of give me a benchmark as to what sections of the exam I needed to start focusing on. My lowest section there was the psych section for sure. I got like a 498, and I remember prior to that being like, I'm gonna be fine. So seeing a score like that made me very, very discouraged. And I had to like really like humble myself to realize how much work I was going to put into this process.
Yeah, so some of the questions that we often receive revolve around the car section. How about that process of sort of setting that baseline for something that isn't just the pure sciences, but rather something a little different?
So I tried to make sure that I worked in a lot of the AAMC's question banks that they had online, in addition to a bunch of like free resources. I hope he's still doing this, but Jack Weston's car passages were like, there were free cars passages like every day. And I would get it in my email, and I would try to like answer it as often as I could, just to give myself practice of like reading through each like article and then like answering the questions about it at the end of it. It to me still feels like a very very unique sort of way of like trying to understand information, but it was like someone online had said something about how like they tried to teach themselves how they approached cars to like use that to approach the rest of the MCAT. And I always found that interesting, because I think that if I would have treated it very equal in that way, that I might have been able to improve at least my car score at that point. But yeah, it was a hard section to prepare for.
Yeah, I know it. How about once you sort of figured out where to start, like you developed that baseline, could you talk a little bit about how you went about actually creating your study plan?
So I found a resource. This person like would make study plans for like $10 or something, and I got really overwhelmed by everyone who would post their study schedules online on any forum or website. And they sort of suggested that I would look at my schedule for the studying for my MCAT studying from like a week perspective, and also from like a month perspective, and like break it up into chunks. So I was able to like look at it as like, okay, I want to dedicate like XYZ number of months. At the time, I didn't want to do like more than 3 or 4, and I ended up studying for about a year or more for my MCAT, because I was working like full-time and studying part-time for my MCAT. So, and I was doing this after I graduated from college, so it was hard to manage, and I had to really keep readjusting my expectations to meet everything. But I started out making my schedule to look at like how much time I wanted to invest each day of the week. And then at the end of the week, I would like readjust it to be like, okay, so I said Monday and Tuesday, I wanted to study 5 hours, and like Wednesday and Thursday to Friday, I wanted to do like 3 hours each. And then I would just like be honest with myself of how much time each of those days I did end up spending, just to keep reevaluating how much more time I needed to like continue to invest in like certain sections of the exam, and also to just like what I was doing as a like on a big scale, just like make sure that I was still doing enough practice questions, enough like spaced repetition and stuff like that.
That's fantastic. I'm sure the folks on the call can resonate with that sort of process. I want to talk a little bit about how you actually studied and practiced for the exam. How did you know that you were engaged in sort of that active learning to ensure that you were, sort of taking in the material in a way that will allow you to demonstrate that you know it for the exam?
I learned the hard way by seeing that I was not improving in any of the practice questions or the first two practice full lengths that I took. And then I had to like reevaluate with myself. I think there was an excerpt in the exam crackers for like chemistry or physics or something. They were talking about active learning as like, just like to teach you about it. And I was like, I mean, I've heard this term before, but like, wow, I did not actually take this like the way that they meant, because I would just be reading what essentially was like textbooks of information and making notes on this, but wasn't like really like committing it to memory so I could actually apply this to every question that I was seeing. So I sort of took a step back and I reevaluated like how I wanted to study for the exam. And this might have been about maybe a third of the way or halfway into like what ended up being my full length of studying. And that's when I started using Anki as like a good resource for like spaced repetition to like make sure that I was doing like flashcards every day that were essentially trying to like work with my mind and how I was going to remember things to keep it like in my memory long enough for me to like apply to the next practice exam, and then again and so forth.
So how did you determine how long to study something, and did you sort of have to adjust that along the way?
Yeah, I think that I had this idea that I had like the MCAT content outline like as a PDF on my computer, and I sort of turned it into like a checklist, and I just wanted to make sure that I'd seen all the topics once for my anxiety at the very least. I didn't know if that was very practical or not. And when I got through either like a Khan Academy video on a subject, or I read a chapter on it, or I reminded myself that like I was essentially like a biochemistry major. So like I knew some things that I just needed to make sure that like I was comfortable with and didn't need to waste time revisiting again. So when I made sure that I'd at least seen a topic once, I like said that it was like done for that pass. And then a second pass would be how familiar with the content I was getting with seeing it through these flashcards that I was doing every day through Anki. And then my third pass was seeing like how I was working with the material when I was actually doing like the practice questions and the question banks through the AAMC or through UWorld, or I think Kaplan also had like some question banks too that I used for a little bit, and the practice exams as well. And I would just see that my first exam, diagnostic exam, was like a 498, and I just tried plotting my scores in each section and overall, just every time I took an exam, just to see how I was trending. And I sort of used that as my baseline to see like, okay, I'm not getting any more progress in this one section, and I don't know how to change how I'm studying to this, but I know it's improving because I was able to jump like 5 points or whatever, but I would like pivot then to like the next subject and so forth, just to keep it fresh for me, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So the practice test sort of helped you gauge along the way how long or how often you need to come back to something that you had studied previously.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. That's awesome. So we know that it's important to conduct a final practice exam simulating as close as possible test day conditions. You had some interesting ways to approach your final rehearsal. Can you share with us the way in which you sort of simulated that process?
So my final rehearsal was that I knew that whenever I was going to take a practice exam, be it the first, the second, or the very last one, that I was always going to try to like emulate how the real exam was going to look for me. So I try to make sure that as much as possible, I didn't like take them at home. I needed to practice like getting up and getting ready and getting out of the door. And then if that meant like going to the library, going to like the Starbucks, or going to like work on like the Saturday at the lab where like no one else was going to be there. So I had like quiet space that wasn't going to be like bothered by anybody. So I would like practice in these environments, and that's how I sort of like simulated taking the exam with its full length for the whole 7.5 hours that it was, just to get into the habit of like, okay, this is the amount of endurance I need to like sit through all these questions, not get too unmotivated when like I finished that section and I feel like I did not answer all those things confidently, I guess in the last 5 questions, etc. So
Yeah, that's really nice. Can you sort of reflect on what that feeling was like to sit through that 7-hour sort of practice? Like, how did that feel going into that?
it was a lot because it feels like through undergrad, and like now I think of med school because my exams here are like so long, but they weren't as long as the MCAT. But in undergrad, I don't think that they were too long either. So that wasn't a good enough practice for me to know what it was going to feel like. So it was definitely something I needed to get used to, that I'm grateful that I took the time and that I had the time, as well as like that privilege as well, to like take practice exams frequently to like know this is what that feeling of like being burnt out after like however long the questions were per section and how much time you had for each section, and to like take my full breaks and make sure that like I refreshed myself, like I stood up and walked around and whatnot. And there were more than a few sections where like I really would feel discouraged at the end of it because I was like, wow, I feel like I did terrible in that section, and it would bias how I did in the next few sections. And I think like an exam or two, I had to like really sit with that feeling to make sure it would like no longer affect me as much as it was doing then, because it would like completely negatively impact how I was doing on each like practice exam.
Okay. Oh, that's really good to know. And that's a message right there. So let's talk a little bit about your support. We know that it's important to take care of yourself, not only in the days leading up to the exam, but during the entire process. How did you find support and perhaps even an accountability partner to sort of keep you going throughout the process?
So I found a lot of like support with my friends and family. And like it was touch and go here and there for everything because everyone has their own problems that they're also dealing with. And it was to make sure that I like was vulnerable with how I was doing with all these people in my life that I like wanted to turn to for support. And I learned like throughout life, and it became very apparent during the MCAT's process of my life, that I needed to make sure that like when I was struggling with like over identifying with how I wasn't doing well in a particular subject or overall, that I needed to like talk about this with people. I also got back into therapy too after I graduated college, after being burnt out from college and then getting back into therapy. And it was important to me to make sure that I was like open and honest with like others and myself about how I was doing with this, because it's one thing to just try to do well on your MCAT and get through it, but like when you start identifying like that your performance is tied to like who you are as a person, it can get really, really hard to like get through the next day of studying the next day, because you just feel like you're not worth it because you're not improving the way that you want to improve.
That's awesome. I often think about this process. And students often put a lot of pressure on themselves in order to push, and in some ways it could be good pressure, but sometimes it can be detrimental to your process. And I hope that they are hearing you today and your discussion of keeping yourself refreshed and healthy along the way, that you're as you're doing that, and of course having that accountability partner, someone to sort of keep pushing you and nudging you along the way is truly important to this process. Some students now are seeking support from online communities to help them sort of move along this process. Can you talk a little bit about your use of online communities?
So when I had graduated college in 2019, which feels forever ago, I had a bunch of friends then that were like also pre-med with me, but we ended up going in our own different trajectories for how we were even gonna like get into medicine. So I remember making an account on what was just the subreddit for pre-meds online, and I made a post wanting accountability partners, and I found 3 friends through that I still do talk to now. Sarah, Asha, and Oren, they were like great accountability partners then, and we would vent about the MCAT together. We would like send resources to each other. Sarah was the closest to me, so like we would always, like whenever it was possible, we would study like physically together. And then it was just a way for us to be like, we're not alone in this, and also like thank you for like reminding me that like I can do this essentially too.
That's really good to hear, because what we want is for students to find as much support. And sometimes you may not be able to find that support where you are locally, and being able to find it online could be a decent substitute for that as you are continuing your journey. So now that you've made it into medical school, could you talk to us or share a little bit about that life and how study strategies that you sort of cultivated throughout your preparation for the MCAT exam helped you along the way?
It's interesting more now, at least as I'm transitioning from the end of my second year into what is called a dedicated study period before we take actual step, our first step 1 exam. And I see a lot of different examples of how my MCAT studying like really set me up for like good progress, at least towards the end of my first year of med school, because the beginning of my first year of med school, I had like thrown a lot of those things to the wayside, thinking that like it might be not analogous to college, but like that I could rely on some of those, that I didn't need to like start changing for how I was studying for the MCAT. And it wasn't until like getting like failing grades, like the first like few classes of med school, where I was like, yeah, no, I need to be seeing material more than just like sitting through that lecture or something, and like reminding myself how I learn. And then like that evolved over time too. You'll hear like visual learners, auditory learners, etc. And like my mind is just weird, and I just like continue to transform in numerous ways. I don't know why. But like I got back into using Anki regularly. I got back into like using practice questions. And then it was interesting, like spring of last year, in my the second half of the first year, I was just like sitting with like weird fear when it would come to practice questions out of nowhere, when no one is viewing your scores for this. This is like just for you. Different like in undergrad and etc. Like when you're sharing your homework, it's going to get graded, etc. Like no one sees your practice questions here in med school. So like, but I was afraid of getting like failing grades on that. And that was interesting. And so once I was learning to be more compassionate to myself essentially, and like embracing like not knowing things, but knowing that like in time I will learn these things, I was doing a lot better. And it was very analogous to like how these different things I would do during MCAT prep, I would be like, okay, I'm getting better in this and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. I think that for us within the AAMC and within this team that pulls together the MCAT exam, we do our best to try to show examinees that this process of preparing for the MCAT is about learning how to learn, like a doctor, really. It's like, how do we take in all of this information and be able to use it in a way that allows us to succeed in academic medicine? And so that's fantastic to hear that it's working out for you and you're continuing to learn along the way. So I think at this moment, we are going to move to the Q&A box to ask a few questions of you from the audience, if that's okay.
For sure.
All right. Any advice on the car section? I'm really struggling with it.
So it's a doozy. It is a doozy. To my detriment, I did not use the AAMC's like car specific question banks until like later into my studying. So I think the earlier you familiarize yourself with like what the like source of this material is going to be as soon as possible, like it'll help you improve, at least start identifying like how you're performing right now, and like what necessarily is like the like negatives or the mistakes that you're making? Is it like things you're missing in the passages? Is it assumptions that you're making? Is it information that like you feel that like you just don't know right now? Because when you think about it, at the very end of the day, cars is super hard. And I think right now I would probably still get the same score that I got then. But I'm thinking now that like I love reading and I love writing and etc. So like it shouldn't have been too much of like a brain block to like get cars like done. So I think just like trying to spend time like really working on it instead of like being afraid of it and then like not actually working on it until like I had to during my studying would have probably helped me identify at least maybe some of the ways that I was doing wrong, and then to like turn to other resources to help guide you like with help. Jack Weston was a good resource. I think UWorld has a really good extensive cars section there, but I think the problem with cars when it's not through AAMC is that like everyone has their own way of nuanced writing. So as best as you can, like familiarize yourself with AAMC cars passages, and then like use that to really help guide you as to how you can improve.
Thank you for that. So also related to the total amount of time you sort of spent studying, do you have sort of a number of days, weeks, months that you spent studying for the MCAT exam?
Remember before this started, I like was checking my folder to see when I did end up taking the exam. I took it July 2020 and I graduated 2019. And I told myself I wanted to take it in 2019. So like that will tell you a lot there because I graduated in May. So I ended up studying like part-time from like the end of college to then. And then COVID hit. I wanted to take my exam at one point in April of 2020, and then all the cancellations made me push it back. So I initially thought that I wouldn't need so much time, but then when I was actually doing all these practice materials and seeing that I needed more time, it was sort of like that reinforcement that like I might want to be done with this like today, but I need to take more time to actually make sure that I'm going to do well.
That's really nice to share that. I know it's going to be different for everyone, but and it's giving them some sort of guide is can be a bit helpful. What are some common mistakes that students make when preparing for the MCAT, and how can I avoid them?
I think some common mistakes. All of a sudden, I'm thinking of one friend of mine from college who wanted to just like sign up for the MCAT just to take it and then like work from there to see. And I was like, please, please, please don't do that. And just like, don't go into this thinking that like you don't need any type of preparation. I think that's one big thing that some people might be overconfident and identify that like they might not need too much. But the opposite, I think, might be the second most or equally as common as that same thing. Like don't undercredit yourself. You know more than you think you do, even if you are like the non-traditional boat and you change majors and you're taking a lot of more like courses for the pre-med requirements in your post-bac years. Like I took a psych course, but I was like an engineering major like at school. So like I didn't have a good basis and I had to like self-study a lot for that when I was studying for the MCAT. But you know more than you think. So like don't tell yourself like maybe you need like a year or 2 years to study for the MCAT. You might need more time. Really use your performance, like your objective evidence, like the scientist that you're training to be at the end of the day. Like you let this information, this data be like what's guiding your decisions for your studying. Like if you're performing below where you want to be performing, then like see like, are my goals unrealistic or are they realistic? And I just need to like budget more time for this. And a third thing, I feel like it's like a life quote, but it's like, don't alienate yourself in this process too. I feel like we forget that like others are suffering too. And like, you just need to make sure you find community, and that's hard. It's really, really hard, but don't be alone like with any of this process because it can just make all the days that suck so much worse. And you don't need that.
Yeah, that's good pointer there. Okay. They asked one person asked, what was your major in undergrad?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the wordy again. It was a glorified biochemistry degree, but it was biomolecular science and engineering at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. It sounds like a lot, really.
Yeah.
Biochemistry.
And what made you decide to do both MD, PhD versus just one? What were some of the deciding factors for you?
The biggest deciding factor for me was after one meeting with my first year advisor, Stephen, at the time. He was telling me like how well I was doing in all of like my straight science courses, and I was just like praising him up and down. And he had known I was pre-med like starting in, but like all of a sudden like he just wasn't hearing me talk about medicine at all. And I was like, well, I wish I could do both. And then a random day they had a student from Albert Einstein just come to talk to us who was an MD PhD, and I had never known that you could do both until that point. I feel like it was like I loved medicine and I loved science, but I didn't know how to get them to like exist with one another because it didn't feel like it made sense to me, and I wasn't familiar with what like biomedical research was until that like event where I got to meet that student. And maybe like meeting me today, you're learning like that's an option too. And I hope that that's awesome for you too. And you do more like investigating with that idea, because it's a fascinating career that made me like sort of reignited my like joy and like fascination with like medicine and like wanting to be involved in that sort of way. If that answers.
Yeah, okay, that's great. One of the questions again, wanting to sort of quantitatively analyze your process. How often did you take the full-length practice exams, and how often, how sort of spread apart were they? If you recall?
I remember initially telling myself that I wanted to do like 12 or something practice full length exams, because I saw someone on Reddit like endorse doing like double digits worth of things, and I wanted to do just as well. Did not have the stamina for that. I think I did like 7, maybe 6 or something. And I wanted to do like one exam a week or 2 weeks to make sure that like I reviewed it, and then went and did like the corresponding material to make sure that I was like refreshing myself on like what the next weakness of mine was that I wanted to hit. And I underestimated how much time I needed for examining questions. For reviewing questions and reviewing like the full lengths. I wasted a lot of time like reviewing questions that like I got right, because I was just like worried that like maybe I did guess, so maybe I just need to like double up on this again. And then I'm being a little too hard on myself, at least with this comment, but like I think I could have reviewed some things better, at least to be like, okay, this was just like a fact that I did not know. Now I know this, I'm adding it to my flashcards, I'm moving on. And I think being more intentional, being more like effective with it, so I wouldn't like waste too much time, that is how I would have approached that. But that's how I ended up doing it. So I ended up probably taking like practice like every like month or 2 months. It was very haphazard because I wanted to do it like almost every 2 weeks or more frequently, but I didn't get to do that.
Yeah, oh, that's so good to hear. And again, it's one of those things that could change depending on your particular circumstances. And you worked while you were studying as well, right?
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
a lot.
so this, yeah, so that it's going to depend on the time that you have available to you, and that's really good to know. There was a question sort of about plateauing. So as you're taking these practice exams or the full length practice tests, if you start to plateau, was there a moment when you felt that you were beginning to plateau, and how did you sort of overcome that if you did?
So I was plateauing towards the maybe like January and March of 2020 maybe, and I was getting like 505s or something on practice full lengths, and I had like lofty goals for wanting like a 515 or 520 or something, and was like really upset that I couldn't get to that point. And I think there are a lot of factors that can impact your progress for this. It might be too easy or inaccurate really to say that like maybe you just don't know enough, so you want to take a lot of time to make sure that like you're looking at all these details for each section of the exam to make sure that you know this and that you're going to do well. Because a lot of it will just vary the day of the exam for like how you're actually going to be able to like physically get through like that 7.5 hours of taking it that day with all the pressures that like you're trying to not focus on, but are subconsciously like affecting your performance, unfortunately. I needed to be really graceful with myself towards that point. And it took me a while to like accept that like I'm not improving any more than I want to see myself improve. And that was hard. That was very hard. Your circumstances might also affect that too. Because if you have the luxury of being able to like give yourself more time to like push your exam back, then like you should do that if you have that privilege and that ability to do so. And if you don't, like you should be kind to yourself and like try to understand like where you are and know that like your exam score is like only going to be like one component of like your application for med school. I know that we always say that for holistic purposes, but it's so true. It's so true. I know it's not.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. I think that that's an important point that often gets missed, is that it is just one component, but it's important. And we often tell students to only take the exam when you feel that you truly are ready to take the exam. It's a lot, and no one expects every student to take this exam multiple times in order to get to a point where they feel prepared to submit a score. So there's another question sort of related to working and doing this preparation. So how did you sort of motivate yourself every day? Was it an everyday thing, or was it that you used a study plan and took a couple days off here or there, and through that process?
In retrospect, I definitely should have budgeted in like days for actual breaks, not just like half days or whatever like you're telling yourself is going to be a break, but it's not an actual break and will refresh you because you need to recharge your batteries for getting through what's going to be the next day of like doing this dual roles essentially. I remember like any random week I would start off that Monday saying that like I wanted to do XYZ. I was living in New York at the time, so like I wanted to do like my Anki cards on the subway ride to work and then subway ride back. And then there would be some commutes where I couldn't even like open my phone. I was just like so tired or whatever from everything else I was like just dealing with life being as hectic as it is. And some days that like maybe I would have more time at work to like have a break to do some studying, a question or two, a flashcard or two. And then some days where there was absolutely no time for me to even eat lunch. So it would vary, but I think we need to remind ourselves, at least what I wish I would have done is like that checking again at like the end of the week or at the end of 2 weeks or whatever, to be like, okay, what I was able to do objectively, what I wanted to do, and like just like adjusting for that would have made it a lot less like teary-eyed at the very least, because I was very upset sometimes when I would be like, oh, I did not get to do XYZ.
Yeah, that's good. You've got to give yourself some grace throughout this entire process. I tell you that. Staying motivated for this long of a study time is going to be hard, and for everyone. So yeah, that's really good to note. There was a question about what were your go-to study resources that you felt were just, I needed these in order to get through.
I think that, and it might be different now for whatever is most popular, but I was very overwhelmed with like resources to choose from. So I remember just picking like, at least for Anki decks, whatever was like the most popular at the time. So like whatever is the most popular now, I feel like that might just speak for itself and you should just go ahead and try that. And then like, don't force yourself to like make it work for you if it's like not serving you in the way you need it to be serving you. And then UWorld, I definitely wish like I was doing like more practice questions, like just more frequently. And I burned out a lot, but like if I had taken more breaks to make sure that like I could come back, and then when I had the time to study, to use that time effectively to like use UWorld, use these AAMC question banks, and like get XYZ questions out by the end of the day and like review them intentionally, and then not waste myself watching an entire playlist of like what Khan Academy videos, or just like watching the specific topics that I just absolutely needed to know because I have never seen them before. And those were some of my most like best star review from me, I would say.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I've got a couple of questions that hopefully you may be able to chime in on as well. Does it look bad if you take the MCAT twice? I think I could start on this one, but maybe perhaps you can add something to it as well. Every institution that you apply to will see all of your MCAT scores. That's typically the way that it's given. Institutions know that students are trying to do their best to paint the best picture of themselves in going into the institution. So objectively speaking, I don't think that that's going to make you look bad. And please remember that each institution looks at MCAT scores differently. There could be some institutions that say it's 10% of what they're looking for. Some institutions may not even look at it until they go through their first round of identifying students that they believe are appropriate for their program. And so I don't think that that's going to be the make or break for any one student to take the MCAT twice. How about you, Jenny?
Yeah, I would just like blanket statement, like I only took it one time. And I think what had like strengthened my resolve to only take it once was that I was worried that like I wouldn't be able to improve much. I got like a 508 and I was like, oh, should I do it again to see if I can get it better? But I wasn't sure how to change my studying. And I guess I had some anxieties as well as like what multiple attempts would look like. But I've known students here and at other schools around the country that like have taken it up to like 4 times or more. And like they're in school, like and a bunch of them have also graduated and they're like in residency or they're intendings. It's really dependent on like on the school, but I don't think it says anything negative about you to take it however many times you need to take it.
Yeah. That's great to hear. Going back to the online communities, were there any that you know of that are free, that are available for students to engage in? And if so, could you share?
I think that the like subreddit like is still free for like everyone to join. I think late into the process, so after MCAT, but like during my application season, there was like a Discord for pre-meds too that was like popular for a little bit. So I think, yeah, if you just like search them up there, I think Reddit and like Discord have like the most like popular and like the largest like user groups for like online user groups for people that are pre-med and like are starting their MCAT journey and stuff like that. I feel biased against like Student Doctor Network, so I would just say like if you're part of that or you're thinking about that, just like not internalize any of the people that you see there, because I feel like it's very self-select and people might be making you feel a little bit bad if you're not like the 4.0 528 student.
Yeah, that's a really good note. That we find that institutions are trying to do their best to find students with a wide range of scores, wide range of GPAs and MCAT scores, because many institutions believe that that's where they're going to find a good mix of students with different perspectives and different backgrounds to sort of fill in their classes. There was a question here about when you took the MCAT exam. Did you take it in the same cycle that you applied in? So did you take it in the same sort of year that you applied to medical school in?
Just like getting like those simple arithmetic questions and not being able to do the math in your head. I think so, yeah, yes. And I was worried too. Oh man, you repress a lot of this stress and trauma. I remember I wanted to take it like originally March, but then I remember putting the money down for April. And then when it was canceled, I would like my anxiety spiraled. And when I was able to take it in July and get my results then, I would be like up all night, like weeks beforehand, like Googling like, what is this gonna look like on my application? Because I already submitted it, but it's there without a score. I mean, I got in. So like it worked out. And I think that like that is maybe biased for me to say, but like I feel like that's the norm for like most people. Like if you just don't have your score at that point, like you're doing schools like a favor to like make sure that they look at you holistically, because it's almost the equivalent, right, for like students that like might be applying to medical school while they're juniors in college or not. Like we're manifesting, you're gonna get through your senior year, obviously. Like we're not gonna say anything bad about that. So like they're gonna make sure that like, yeah, you don't have all these rest of the requirements down, like, but you're gonna get them, so it's fine. So I think the same thing, but I think that was a long way of saying yes, I did apply. I took, you know.
Is there anything different that you wish you would have done with your application now that obviously you're on the other side of it, but were there anything now that you see it and you've seen another group of students come into your medical school, is there anything different that you would have done with your application?
I think that and I don't know if like this will apply so much more for like people that just want to do like MDs or MPHs or whatnot, other type of combined degrees. But there's this organization called APSA that like matched me with a mentor during my application cycle when I told them that I was interested in applying MD PhD, and I got a mentor that like showed me his application and like wanted to help me with like different sections there. But I had like already at that point like crafted out my statements and stuff like that, which I'm proud of. But it would have been so nice to like know what like students that already got accepted like see examples of stuff like that already. So like if there's a way for you to get access to that through your institution or through organizations like online that are like supportive of pre-meds that are entering whatever field of medicine, you should see if that's something there, because I would have wanted to like rephrase certain things better to like rebrand myself. And I was very insecure of my acceptance chances. So I applied to like everything, to AMCAS, the DO, the one in Texas, DMDSAS, yeah, a bunch. Podiatry schools, yeah, there was a lot. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. There are lots of options in terms of medical school, but there are definitely a lot of students applying to medical school. So that totally makes sense in trying to maximize your chances of getting into medical school. Let's see, we've got some more questions. How did you structure your Anki decks? Did you get some that were already pre-made, or did you create your own?
Yeah, so I found ones that like were already pre-made and that were like the most popular online, and just like wanted to like use them. For the life of me, I cannot think of any of their names right now. I have all the med school ones in my head, and I'm not going to waste your time with telling you those names. So I would just find what is most popular right now and like try to use that. I think it'll save you a lot more time, because like if it works out, then like you don't have to make your own cards. But if it turns out that like you're going through user made like all these other decks that others have made and they're not working out for you, then like it might end up being that like you need to make some cards for yourself and then like budget the time that that's going to take for you into your studying, because that's essentially like writing notes all over again, and you're trying to like cut that out so that you can save time and use that towards like more active studying.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you for that. I've got one here. I feel like I'm compelled to ask. It's, hey, Jenny, your experiences really resonate me, as I am a Nigerian pre-medical student preparing for the MCAT. Practically speaking, how did you overcome that feeling of self-disappointment after getting the same MCAT score?
So, man, my Nigeria's brothers and sisters out there, geez. But like to all of us that are all struggling too, it's hard. I had plateaued around like 505s or whatever, 506s, my last MCAT, practice MCAT. And then when I got back my real score of like a 508, I was just like, what does this mean for me? And like, it was 70th percentile then, but like, I felt like it was like terrible for my odds getting into school, especially for MD PhD programs. With the self-report bias. So I had to do a lot of work, not just like with myself, but like in therapy and with friends and family and stuff like that, to like really work on what the problem was at the end of the day, it was over identifying with my academic performance. And it's hard, like we're putting this task now on students like during the MCAT process to like work on not over identifying with your performance, but throughout your pre-med journey in undergrad and beyond and like beforehand too, like you're working towards doing the very best in all of your courses to get like that 4.0 or whatever you're shooting for. So then to sort of pivot and be like, no, don't be focused on that. Like it feels hypocritical, but it's I think they're like two sides of the same coin. I am in this same seat, like both proud and like still cringe at that score. But like, why am I cringing at it? Because it was like what I could do best then. And I should be accepting of that. But it's hard. I'm hard on myself for a lot of things. It's a hard journey because like it won't change once you get into med school, because you will. Question asker and everyone else here in this lovely webinar. Like you'll still deal with that again while you're here as a student and beyond, but it'll get easier to deal with day in and day out. I promise you that for sure.
That's really nice for you to say. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, that's important again to sort of take care of yourself and give yourself grace as you're sort of figuring out this process. I do have a question that's probably painted more towards me. How do I study for the MCAT if I cannot afford the paid self-prep resources? So the AAMC does provide fee assistance for individuals that are unable to afford it. The fee assistance program, I believe, is somewhere around 400 times the current poverty line. So there are a lot of folks that are applying to medical school or registering to take the MCAT exam that may fall into that category, and that will provide you with free access to many of the resources that we provide. And also we're currently piloting a program with Kaplan to provide individuals with about 60% off of their resources if you are approved for the fee assistance program within the AAMC. So please use that resources if you believe that you qualify. There's a link in the chat for that now. All right, you think you have enough stamina for a couple more questions?
For sure. This is easy.
Let's see. How far in advance did you schedule your MCAT exam? And I think this one's probably sort of related to not wanting to have to reschedule. Yeah. So how do you think about that process of scheduling the exam?
I think that I think some advice I had also gotten at the time, either from other students and from like maybe some advisors at school, they were like, make sure like whatever date you end up selecting, you have enough time to like reschedule it if you need to. So I forget like how long the grace periods are. They're like 30 days. They're like bronze, gold, and silver tiers, right? Maybe, I'm not too sure. And you do like I think what it should be a mix of in retrospect is what gives you the most amount of time possible to like get your scores in by whatever deadline you need them for. If you're submitting that same cycle, then like shoot for like this day and then like have the backup day be for like what, like a month further or whatever if you need to like budget more time for studying and like let that sort of guide you. Because I based it around like the cycle I was applying to. I wanted to do it before it started up, but like I ended up taking it during the cycle. So like it'll be fine either way how it works out.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Okay. Average scores for each of the med schools that they sort of show you can vary. So what did you use to sort of determine the score that you were shooting for on the MCAT exam?
I think that I like had a lofty dream of like 520, 515 or whatever. And I still right now, I can't tell you where I got that number from exactly. It's like I would go on the MSAR to like look at what schools have reported their admitted students and matriculated students like having. And I used that to be like, okay, so this is like what I should be ranging for. And I think that to me wasn't too much of importance because like I was trying to like overcompensate for that, like just in case like I needed to be higher than the average. And I ended up being like the average or below. I like the schools that I was accepted to, which was interesting. But yeah, that's how that I sort of like worked with that, if that answers that.
Okay, all right, all right. Let's see. Another question, aspirational one. What specialty do you want to go into?
Oh, at this moment, okay, if you asked me when I started med school, it would probably have been like hemonc. And like now, probably sure. Because I'm probably gonna like do my PhD in molecular biology. So I'm like, it feels very easy to just be like hemonc, bio. That's what I'm just gonna do in translational research. But like a lot of things have been like so interesting to me. Like surprisingly, not if you think about like my MCAT, because like my MCAT, my best section was psych, very funny. And then when we had like our psychiatry and psychology section here at Rutgers, I was like, that was like my best block and like all of the ones that we've had. And I was like, that's funny. And psychiatry became like very interesting to me then too. And I've like loved pathology, weirdly enough. There's so much. Medicine's so cool. Like let this stuff be like what like interests you as well. But if you are in any way, shape, or form getting worried that you need to know it, like know what you're interested in beforehand, try your best to like kick that idea to the curb because you'll get 1,000,001 opportunities to like interact, shadow, learn from, meet all these different specialties, and you'll get your experience with that. And that's before rotations. And then when you're actually like doing like what the like responsibilities for each of these like specialties and subspecialties look like. But yeah, right now it could be anything, but before it was hemonc, in short.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this. Thank you for your time. I feel like we're running up on the end. Is there anything else that you want to say to these potential examinees before we go?
I wish all of you so much good luck. You got this. And you know, a good therapist through Rutgers once told me to be kind and gentle with myself. And I'd always laugh at her and be like, Sarah, what do you mean by that? And I end up saying a lot of that to myself now. And I haven't seen this woman in like a year plus. But be kind and gentle with yourself throughout this process. And that's like stereotypical to say, but like, I mean it, really. Like, be kind and gentle to yourself. Like, you're being nice to all your friends and family in your life. You should treat yourself the same way too. Do you need more time for whatever it is, for a break, for studying, for your work, for classes that you're doing, or for life that you're trying to deal with? Like, give yourself that, because you'd give that to anybody else. So be as nice as you are to others to yourself.
Yes, and I'll add, just please use the resources that we have to the best of your abilities. There's an amazing study plan guide that's available to you. Some of the other resources have been noted in the chat. Please visit the Student Resident Hub. There's also a link in the chat to provide some feedback on this webinar so that we can continue to improve and make them better. Thank you all for your time. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jenny. Really appreciate your support on this. And we'll take it away.
Thank you. And yes, please do give us your feedback on this presentation by filling out the evaluation that will pop up on your screen as soon as we end. We did record the session and we will email you once we post the archive. On behalf of the Association of American Medical Colleges, thank you, Jenny, Javarro, and of course, everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful day.